Here it is, and I want to ask you, please use the microphone because though it looks like a small room, it's hard for old people to hear in there.
These things make me twice as nervous as otherwise, and I actually get more nervous in front of crowds than people might suspect. Hey Darren, how's it going, buddy?
Hi, Michael.
It's nice to see some folks, some friendly faces, some folks I know. Bill, how's it going, Bill? I have really good news. I'm not here to convince you all to be social workers. So right off the bat, if at the end of this conversation, which is really what I want it to be, it'd be great to sort of understand a little bit about where your head or where your sort of lens is afterwards, like, this is interesting, maybe I might be willing to sort of work with a guy like Mike, or maybe not, or I'm unconvinced. That would be really good information for me. I'd really like to hear your concerns, your experiences in working with the population that I come to work and work for every single day for the last 11 years. It's challenging for us at the shelter. It's been challenging for us as housing providers because we are also housing providers. And so I want to hear what your experiences are, and I want to hear what you all think might help and bridge the gap between what we're trying to accomplish and reducing the impacts of homelessness it has on an individual, which is obviously tragic, and the impacts it has on the community, which is a terrible waste of resources. So with that said, I did want to read a letter to show you what sort of I'm trying to accomplish with anyone that I'm working with, and most specifically tonight with landlords. So this is a letter that I got at my request from a landlord in Longmont who 5 years ago decided not to work with rental assistance vouchers any longer. So let me quickly read this to you. This sort of represents a narrative that hopefully describes the sort of attitude and approach that the shelter certainly takes, and I think the community now wants to take in terms of working with landlords, both private landlords and affordable housing providers. So it says, over the course of the past 6 years, we worked with many hundreds of Section 8 voucher holders from several local housing authorities. Like many landlords, we struggled with this dynamic, trying to strike a balance between providing a service to the needy population and the reliable revenue provided by a voucher tenant versus the least compliant challenges this population often brought, as well as housing advocates who often choose to approach problems as an adversarial battle rather than a collaboration working towards solutions. During this time, the shelter's Housing First voucher program stood in stark contrast to this commonly negative experience. Housing First approached their relationship with us as in a collaborative manner based on open dialogue and trust. Housing First case managers took a solution approach to their work that included taking time to understand and accommodate our business needs when working on tenant issues. For their clients, Housing First provided support regularly in the unit, face-to-face, continually working to maintain and on the lookout for issues that could affect client stability and lease compliance. Likewise, they invested in their relationship with us, taking the time to build rapport and trust before issues emerged, so when problems did present themselves, understanding, respect, communication, and trust quickly led us to solutions that were acceptable to everyone involved. This is, do I really have to speak with this? This is the goal, right? With anyone that I establish a relationship with, I want it to be trusting, I want it to be collaborative, and most certainly in terms of the deficit that we face in trying to connect our clients when they do get rental assistance with the kind of resource, hard asset they're going to need in order to exit homelessness. This is what we want to do. We want to understand your needs. You are not social workers. You are people trying to make money. And that is a perfectly legitimate enterprise. I did it for 20 years before deciding I should really become a social worker. And so we have, every relationship is one in a balance of needs. It's not me versus anybody. And I have to find the middle ground if I'm going to take the long game approach to helping my clients. And so that is our approach to the shelter. I think the system is very well aware that they have to develop these sorts of relationships, and that they, in many cases, have failed to be responsible to a greater picture of what it means to provide assistance to the homeless. So just quickly, I think that it's worth mentioning that homeless and the view of homeless nationally has changed dramatically over the last 40 years or so. I'd love to use the whiteboard, so I am going to ask you to hold the microphone maybe. So, anyone who's ever been involved in homelessness, homeless services, has always been trying to end homelessness. This is not anything new. Homelessness essentially did not exist in our landscape prior to 1980. This was a fringe social problem, a real one for those suffering with it, but in terms of how we talk about it today, it just didn't exist. If you do searches on newspaper articles on homelessness pre-1980, you cannot find them. The word homelessness isn't really part of our lexicon until the 80s. Okay, certain social changes occurred, and all of a sudden we have people who can't earn a home. And what we did is we reacted to homelessness the same way that we had historically reacted to homelessness throughout our history, when it was just a sort of force majeure, temporary act of God type of event. We opened shelters, and it was a pretty simple idea. So if you have a person who's suffering from homelessness, they may exist in a continuum of need, right? There's folks who are very low need, and there are folks who are high need. But our services weren't particularly oriented towards this. Darren, I don't know if I'm comfortable with you filming. Is it appropriate to
It's a
ask?
public event, so
All right.
you can be comfortable or not.
So, our efforts to get a home for anyone who were experiencing homelessness started at sheltering. And the notion was twofold. One, we can prevent them from dying on the streets. And two, really, when they get a stable place like a shelter bed, then they'll be able to exit homelessness. So regardless of where they were in this continuum, it would lead to a house and homelessness is solved. After a certain amount of time, we started to realize that this really wasn't happening, that this dynamic really wasn't existing for folks that were in sort of a lower need, who didn't have to change dramatically in order to gain the resources to earn a home, worked okay. In fact, that really covers a great majority, statistically, of the people who experience homelessness. It's usually very short-lived. People need a short amount of help, and they can exit on their own, they can access resources, they can call family, they can gather whatever resources they need to become housed again. But what we learned is that this part of the population was languishing. So there was a change. There was this idea that we could use programming within shelters to stabilize people. We could provide case management, and we could impose certain ideas about things that cause their homelessness. You have to get treatment, you have to go to job training, you have to be sober, all sorts of requirements. And the notion was that we could inspire people to change, and when they change, they become low need, and then they can earn a home. Well, maybe this line that the system worked a little bit, worked well originally. Maybe we were able to move this a little bit this way, right? But it didn't work that well because people don't change very much. I don't change very much. You don't change very much. Change is really, really hard. I think about ways I can change all the time, and I don't. So taking the people who need to change the very most, the most unlucky of all of us, put them in an unstable situation like homelessness, in a collective setting like a homeless shelter, which is chaotic and dealing with all sorts of different issues, all sorts of exposure to even pathogens, and, mental illness and addiction issues, all in this one place, and this is where you're going to change. and become low need. This was not a great plan. Very well intended, but what we learned is that didn't work very well. And the folks with the higher needs were languishing still. And while they're languishing, that's just code speak for spending a lot of time in the jail, a lot of time on the streets, a lot of time in the ER, a lot of time in shelters, a lot of time in the courts. They were costing the community, if they were homeless at least a year, the statistics show they were costing the community over $50,000 in services a year. And they were dying at an average age of 55 years. So what did we do? The next change was a group of folks in New York City decided, why don't we just put them in a house? Why don't we consider housing a right? Let's not predetermine that they can't be housed. Maybe the home is the stability they need to address their mental health issues, to address their substance abuse issues, to address their other challenges, their other culmination of bad luck that brought them to this state to begin with. So we did this carve out. And for the folks who are chronically homeless, we developed this thing called Housing First. And you've heard about it on the news, and Salt Lake City has gotten a lot of press about this, and you heard it referenced in the letter I read to you. This is a notion that without conditions, you give someone a house. And then you start to work with them, because the house is stable. Okay? What happens? It costs a lot of money. They have a supportive case manager and rental assistance. But guess what? It's about 40% the cost of having them on the street. And it works. 75% of the people that we put in our supportive housing units have stayed longer than 2 years. I added up all of the lengths of our tenant lengths for everyone who's ever participated in our program, 75 different people. Our average length of our average tenant length is a little over 4 years. I don't know what your average tenant length is. I don't know if 4 years seems like a lot or 4 years seems like a little, but it seems like it's a pretty good amount of time. And it seems like for the landlords who are providing that service, they're benefiting from that overall picture. So the idea is you don't expect people to change in a shelter. Let's treat housing as a right for them. Let's treat housing as a better response to homelessness from an effectiveness and cost effectiveness point of view. Let's get them right into a house. I'm going to finish my whole thing, then maybe we'll go to questions before I pass it up. Then something else happened. Say, why aren't we treating everybody in a housing first way? Why are we just limited to these folks? Because there's a whole other subset of needy folks who are still languishing, who we don't have good answers to. And while we're trying to treat them in shelter still and having all these compliance type of programming for them, sure, it works for some, but most often they just end up here anyway. So let's get them into housing fast before things get worse. Because if you think about a homeless shelter, it shouldn't surprise you that it actually can make their conditions worse. It's not a healthy place to be. It creates a lot of anxiety, so is substance abuse going to get better naturally? Sorry, Susan. Is substance abuse going to get better in a shelter? Probably not. Is their health going to get better in a shelter? Probably not. Is their mental health issues going to get better in a shelter? Probably not. So we start to take the housing first notion and we apply it to the entire spectrum of folks. Sometimes it's just a few days in a shelter. They don't need any help at all. Okay? Sometimes it's help getting a job and they need a month in a shelter. And we're going to do some first and last month rent and they're in a house. Sometimes we do a temporary assistance program called rapid rehousing. This is short-term to a year's type of assistance. They get a case manager, and in the stability of the home, we can maximize their income. Okay? We can start getting people into treatment because they're not struggling on a day-to-day basis. And then we can exit them for these medium needs people. In this middle zone, there are some people who are disabled, they can't work, they're gonna need rental assistance. That's all they need. They don't need a case manager per se. They don't need me going every week. Maybe I check in once every couple of months. Or maybe the landlord has my number so they can call me if things are going haywire. So here's your Section 8, or what we call HCV. Your is rapid rehousing. And sure, over here, what we now call permanent supportive housing, which has replaced housing for the most needy. And this ends up looking at what the dynamic is. But we can't do it without apartments and assets. And so how do we take this new system that now is data-driven, we know it works, stop relying on shelters, reduce community costs, and end people's homelessness? Well, we have to partner with you all. And so that's what I want to do here today, is one, explain what we're doing. This is what we're doing. And I want to answer your questions that you have about what that means, where the system is in terms of being able to bring these kind of resources, and what about all the support you're talking about? Where is that going to come from? I want to get into those sort of questions. You had a question.
You mentioned earlier that they were staying at one location for 2 to 4 years, and I'm assuming that's just, they're staying in one house or one lease or something. After that point, do they go to another house then for another 2 to 4, or in that case, are they doing well enough to go to low or some other thing?
Repeat the question.
The question is sort of a dig into this sort of notion that we measure our success based on a 2-year metric. Typically we have to report our metrics, and a question about what happens after this 4-year period. The support is intended to be permanent, okay? And we meet the clients where they are. Some people don't get better. Sometimes we just help them stay stable and housed, and they're perfectly good tenants, but they don't really improve their metrics because their impairments and their assortment of impairments, manifest themselves in a way they're just not going to get better per se. They're permanently housed, they're not in jail, they're not in the ER. Some people get immeasurably better, but their disabilities are such they still need some support. They still, there's still potholes out there that we need to help navigate with them. There's still work to do. So they're going to stay in the program as well. And there are people who do really, really well, really stable, exceed what may be called our expectations, but we try not to have any essentially because it's housing first. And so they exceed what the program is designed for, and we switch them to a lower level of support. So we can create room in our program for someone who needs it more. So we'll graduate people. Sometimes that's the outcome. So they'll just switch to a regular voucher. And sometimes, it's happened twice, but sometimes people get so much better that they are gone and off any kind of assistance altogether. One of my clients who left for North Carolina, she was unconscious after trying to kill herself, drink herself to death at Long Island United Hospital. She woke up, she came into our program after spending some time at detox. She never took another drink, got her in her house, stayed on her med programming, started working as a hairstylist. I think 3 or 4 years later, we got her onto an unsupported voucher. She continued to increase her stability, increase her earned income. She turned in her voucher, started paying her own rent. And then 2 years ago came and she said, I'm leaving for North Carolina. I need a change. She just came back because she decided North Carolina wasn't quite as good as Boulder County after all, but she'll, she's with a friend and she'll get a job and pay her own way. So that's for us the best case scenario is someone getting housed, but we want our clients to aspire to whatever they can achieve. With that said, I think maybe we'll keep questions to the end. Deb works very acutely on one specific type of program, this what we call rapid rehousing approach to this sort of spectrum of need, and maybe she can expand on what she's doing. She's been very successful in establishing landlord relationships as well for her clients, and she can give some more details about that program.
I'm Deb, and there are several programs within Boulder County that we work with that have different funding criteria and different funding resources, and Sandy is going to talk a little bit about that, and I'm going to pass out some brochures, and then I will let you know what my part is in that I'm the one that works directly with the landlords. So this is Sandy.
Hi. I'm not sure if any of you landlords work with us, but if you do have tenants in a Boulder County Housing Authority assistance program, you may work with me already. But as Michael said, our program is this rapid rehousing. It's a housing first program. So it is not, it's for the people at the lower end of vulnerability. You know, right now, there's a whole national coordinated entry way of assessing basically people's vulnerabilities and risk factors when they're homeless, and then diverting or finding the right path for each person according to their barriers. So the people that we work with sometimes are homeless with not a whole lot of barriers, maybe victims of domestic abuse, and they find themselves homeless. Maybe their child got hurt, and they had to take care of their child and missed a lot of work, and then they found themselves either evicted or kicked out or had to leave where they were living. So our program is a short to medium term rental assistance program with intensive case management. And the piece that I think would be really beneficial for landlords is knowing that you have a whole team, a whole program, and a case manager along with the tenant, all working towards the goal of that tenant becoming self-sufficient. So, I mean, it's a really beneficial, when you advertise and have an opening for one of your units, you probably definitely run backgrounds and everything like that, but you might not know their support system. And what's beneficial about our housing stabilization program at Boulder County is you'll have, the tenants have a support system. And our goal as the housing stabilization program is to really develop that long end goal of developing relationships with the community. Because it's beneficial for the community as a whole. It's beneficial for the people that we assist, but it's also beneficial for our whole community and for you too. And we offer some things like, besides the case management piece, possible extra deposits and things like this, that we understand that some of these tenants may have some high barriers to leasing up because of their different backgrounds or possible evictions. But I don't want you to worry about that, because that's not, I don't know, I saw Michael jump in. Okay. There are people out there in all walks of life that don't come from being homeless that have a lot of barriers to leasing up. I mean, we know that Boulder County is really hard to lease up already, and so these are things that we could do as a program to support you as landlords and to support the tenant and the community. So you have people making certain that the tenant pays their portion of rent. Usually these rapid rehousing programs, the tenant pays 30% of their income towards rent, with the goal of always getting more self-sufficient, so at the end of the program they can stay leased up and pay their full rent. So that's the goal from the very beginning of the program. Deb is our housing navigator, so she is out here working with tenants on finding housing. And she is a great advocate for working with the homeless and also working with landlords. And she will tell you more a little bit about her role. I feel I'm missing something about our program.
It'll come back around.
Yeah. Yep. So here's Deb.
Well, I just passed around one of the brochures that we have for Boulder County Housing and Human Services that explain some parts of our program, probably the most essential parts of our program, and in part to what the housing navigator, what I do on behalf of our participants. But some of the things that it doesn't cover is when I meet with our participants, find out what it is that they're looking for, what area of Boulder County they want to live in. They might have a community in Longmont, they might have one in Boulder, so they have areas that they would prefer to live in. So I listen to all of the things that they want, that are their preferences. Now, whether we can provide that or not, we don't know, but they can get anywhere from a studio to up to a 4-bedroom, depending on how many children they have, how many members there are in their family. And like these two were saying, they just come from so many different types of backgrounds. I've worked with probably a good number of women who have been in domestic violence situations and truly have no resources at the moment. And we help them get leased up into an apartment, and we help them in terms of case management. We help them with financial classes. We help them if they need some sort of health classes, if they need substance abuse, any of those types of things. The case manager can help them obtain those services. And the point of some of our projects, some of our programs are to help people become self-sufficient. And then there are those folks that won't eventually happen with, but we want to be able to help them to become as functional as they can be. And one of my roles I've discovered over the last 2 years with Landlords, when I call, I will meet a participant, like I say, and find out what it is that they're looking for, and what area they want to live in, and that sort of thing. And then I start contacting the different landlords in anywhere in Boulder County and talking with them. A lot of landlords have heard of our program. Can you all hear me back there? A lot of landlords have heard of our program and have had good experiences with us and would like to continue on with that. I meet a lot of landlords who have never heard of our program, and so I do spend quite a bit of time explaining what it is that we do, what we have to offer, and how a landlord's participation as far as being able to help the community if that's a desire. And our participants again have case management. You receive timely payments and all of those sorts of things. So those are a lot of the types of questions that I get. But most of the landlords I work with, they have 3 questions. Does the individual, well, maybe 4. Does the individual have a criminal background? Is the individual currently using substances, that sort of thing? Do you have a vetting process that you go through? They will ask me, do you think that your participant will keep our property, will take care of our property, keep our property clean and treat it with respect? And I've found, again, over the last 2 years that the best way that I work with landlords, this is true with apartments as well, but not as true as working with a private landlord, because I have agreed with all of the private landlords that I work with, if they say to me, Deb, please don't send me someone that you know has had a felony in the last 5 years. Or please don't send me someone that you know, that you have observed that they do not treat their current place, wherever they're living, with respect. Just, I'm asking you not to send me those kinds of folks. And so I make that agreement is to the best of my ability with my private landlords, with any landlord who asks me that because I want to build relationship with you. I don't want to burn bridges with you. And if you ask me, please don't send me someone who has a violent past or a drug history or any number of things, then I won't do that to the best of my knowledge. And I have had landlords call me before and say, I have this 3-bedroom home in this part of town, do you have a participant? And I know that landlord's requirements. I know what they are looking for in terms of a tenant. And I can either say yes or no. And sometimes I've said no, I don't have anyone that fits what it is that you're looking for. And so I don't send them anyone. And because that is my biggest part. I want to help my participants, but my biggest piece for me is developing relationships with landlords. And I don't want to burn bridges with anyone, and I don't want to disrespect. I want Boulder County Housing and Human Services to have a good relationship with our community versus promising you something that I already know that I can't provide. So I think that's all I have to say. Anyone have questions, or Michael, do you want to?
Oh, you have to hold on to the microphone.
Okay. Susan did say, even though you think you speak loudly, they can't hear you.
Oh, she can hear me.
Mike?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, but just a few numbers if we could. On your scale there, what percentages do you think fit into, well, you got like 5 categories there? What percentages fit into
Oh,
those?
God.
And do you see them growing or shrinking or?
It's really, really hard to say. I mean, homeless data is famously inaccurate.
But you know how
We
many.
do the best we
your-
can. So with that said, there's a researcher in the University of Pennsylvania named Dennis Mulvane, who estimates that 70%, 75% of the folks who experience homelessness experience it very short term. And if they enter systems, they enter for less than 30 days, and they need very little support other than this very interim. In other words, their bad luck has not manifested itself in such a great amount of barriers to them getting their needs met that they can just use the temporary support. So these are the folks, for lack of a better expression, that you don't notice, right? These aren't making the sort of impacts. They're not absorbing a lot of community resources. Their bad luck doesn't manifest itself into a huge expense for the community. It doesn't manifest itself necessarily in it's pretty bad outcomes for people who live in poverty in terms of their life expectancy too, but it doesn't reach this sort of level that affects really long-term homelessness. So there's your basis right there. So up to about 3/4 of folks really need very little assistance at all, right? And we also know statistically, I think the stat is something like 20% of the population takes up 80% of the resources. So chronic homelessness nationally is in this sort of, I think 12 to 15% range. That's for anyone who is basically defined to have been homeless for longer than a year. Okay, so they are recognized as the folks, one, whose impact homelessness has on them is the greatest. They're going to have the greatest effect. They're going to be in jail the most. They're going to impact the community the most too. And so that's about, again, 12, 15% of the population. And so that's leaving, on any given night, an additional 12, 15% or so in this middle zone is going to need some other sort of assistance. But it's so fluid. I don't want to pretend that
No, but do you see the whole thing being cyclic? Like the whole mass is growing, like during when everybody was getting foreclosed on, and so they needed something for a while and things like that.
Well, there's definitely cyclical stuff that does affect
or is
homelessness.
it always? I just have a feeling that it's always growing.
I would suggest, yeah. I mean, we unfortunately, I don't want to talk politics, so you can imagine what mine are, right? We have a system that at some point when people's bad luck is bad enough, they become homeless. Because the system is not there to provide you supports. I mean, that's what we're here doing, right? Boulder County has decided to change how we provide system support. Rather than depend on the individual to change to meet the needs of the system, to earn your home, it's a recognition that the system has to adjust, right? But as a nation, the system exists in a way that is always going to create homelessness. And this has been true due to various things, especially starting in the 70s and 80s. that, you know, I could get into and I could, you know, but.
No, but if I was a investing landlord and I wanted to participate in your programs,
Yep.
then I could see a secure future in having vouchers come in every month.
Yes.
Is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, I mean,
And
sure, I
I'll
mean-
buy more and.
Yeah, I was looking at the numbers today. We've had this program going in our shelter for 10 years, this permanent supportive housing program. We've got people who've been in a house for 11 years. That's a great tenant in the same location.
Yeah, and I know Boulder County's just was awarded, I'm not gonna say it correctly, but okay, so we were awarded a whole lot of more vouchers even in this political climate. So I think nationally that nationally, even though I'm sure I probably agree with Michael's politics, nationally we're talking more about homeless people. We are receiving, here in Boulder County also because of the great work in Boulder County, we are receiving more vouchers, more funding, more federal and state funding. So, I mean, going back to your need, or it will be there. We just recently, I don't want to say the numbers because I might be wrong, but we were awarded a big grant for housing vouchers.
I mean, I guess what I'm saying to this person, this theoretical landlord who would like to, one, participate in a social good, and two, take advantage of funding that's out there so that they can have a successful business, is we want to be the bridge to that reality, right? We want to make it possible so that you can work with anyone along this scale and be successful. It doesn't mean it works for everyone. You know housing doesn't work for everybody because you have clients who aren't homeless who are problems. So how can we be the mitigation for how their bad luck, it creates a barrier to their stability. So can we walk with them and help them be stable and help our relationship with our landlords be profitable ones? Yes, sir.
How do you help mitigate the risk of meth? That's one question. And the other one is, do you mostly deal with one-bedroom units?
For individuals, the shelters work at the Boulder Shelter for Homeless is for adult individuals, unaccompanied adults. So the answer is yes. For Deb's program, it can be individuals or it can be families. The question was, thanks, Susan. The question was, are we talking about primarily one-bedroom units? And the answer is, for my work, yes, and for the work of the shelter, since we deal with unaccompanied adults, yes. But system-wide, there are family folks doing the same sort of work. Deb and her team are doing this sort of work for families as well.
Yes.
So it can be.
So it could be many bedrooms. We have quite a few recent approved participants in our program that have 6-8 kids. So I mean, we're talking needy. The need is there for large 3-4 bedroom places. But the meth question is good. Maybe Michael would have an answer for that.
I can only be honest on this one.
Yeah.
So the premise I'm talking about in terms of housing as a solution to homelessness is really the suggestion that housing is the best tool we have to address all sorts of social issues.
Right.
Right? And meth has arisen as a really unique one. And I'd like to say that housing is the best tool we have to mitigate these impacts. If your concern isn't meth, but it's 25% of the jail population is the homeless, I'm going to say the best way to mitigate that is by housing the homeless. If your concern is the mental health issues of the homeless, I'm going to suggest to you the best way to mitigate that impact is housing. It's all data driven. If your concern is substance abuse, I'm going to say the best way to mitigate that impact of homelessness and substance abuse is housing. But meth is an issue because the remediation and the damage caused to your units is outside of this realm. And right now, the energy from that is coming from the ground up, which is to say that we, on the ground, see this as this huge barrier. And we don't have a good solution to that issue, and it's causing a lot of unrest with our partner landlords, and it's causing a lot of risk for the partner landlords. But so far, HUD, from the top down, Housing and Urban Development, that funds most of these programs, does not have a good answer. And I go to conferences and I'm looking for the breakout session on meth, and there isn't one.
And I'd like to venture a guess that people that have never been homeless often have substance abuse problems too. So I mean, it's a problem not just in the homelessness population. And the one thing I just wanted to focus on was the supports that you would get through being in some type of program through Boulder County or through the shelter, is the supports behind the scene to help that tenant get assistance.
So I don't have great answers. If you were a landlord and said to me, please don't send me a meth user, I would either not, if I had a meth user, I wouldn't work with you, right? I wouldn't represent, I have to be a dignified person, I have to be an authentic person, I have to go to sleep at night and get up the next day and do this work day after day after day after day. And so I'm not gonna misrepresent what how a client can be incredibly risky for a landlord, because the whole system collapsed on itself. We unfortunately though, from a systematic point of view, we're waiting for direction from the funders as to how to deal with this specific issue. And I wish I had a better answer right now for that. My program, we have not dealt with any meth use in our scattered site landlord-based program. And it's a tragedy, anyone dealing with methamphetamines. But I will say that the best response still for substance abuse across the board, for substance abuse that doesn't represent a risk for the landlord, like meth does, that our programming is the best way to address that in terms of its impacts. And we're very, very successful. We have a lot of issues with substance abuse in the chronic homeless population. It is not generally the barrier that we think it is in terms of stability of housing, because of the support. I don't know how to go in order. That's me.
Did I hear you say that you assist and provide support for the landlord?
In terms of,
and I'm not talking about money, I'm talking about, generally support for the landlord. And the reason I ask is I had a Section 8 client, and she had somebody to assist her. And then I felt like I was odd man out. She had her support, but I didn't have any, and so I was always treading water to make sure I was doing everything appropriately, so I didn't end up in trouble, because here she was with her problems and her helper, counselor, whatever you would call it. So that's my question is, what would the landlord get from you that would support the landlord's needs?
well, did you all hear that question? Most people? We do, in terms of providing case management, I've seen the case managers that we work with, I have seen them quite often when a landlord, if and when a landlord has an issue with that particular participant. We had one participant that agreed to mow the lawn, and they weren't doing that. And so the landlord reached out to us to get our help on that, to be able to talk with the participant and say, this is part of what it means to be a tenant in an apartment or in a home. And so we do help quite a bit with that sort of thing. This is what it means. This is part of what it means to be self-sufficient. So if a landlord does have issues that we truly can help with and talk to the participant about, we are more than happy to do that. And my phone number is on the back of the brochures. Mm-hmm. I'm not the case manager, doesn't mean, I still get a lot of landlords just calling me about different questions because I'm the contact person, but that they last worked with. But our case managers are very hands-on, and so I suppose depending on what kind of assistance that the landlord was looking for, we would definitely be willing to do our best. That's for sure. I am.
Well, in this case, it was some yard work that wasn't being done, and then the the tenant was a smoker and it was a non-smoking house. And how do you prove that if you don't actually see him puffing on a cigarette? Smell,
Yeah, the
and then what do you do? Okay, it smells like smoke, so then what?
Yes, and in a
It's gonna be
situation,
them arguing that no, they don't. With you, yes, I smelled it.
but yes, we do, and in those kinds of situations, we would, like the one that I was describing, the person was not mowing the lawn like they had agreed to do. And so, we did talk with the participant, the case manager did, and if the case manager isn't able to make, headway with that person, with that tenant that is agreeable with the landlord, then my supervisor can get involved if need be, and because that is again a huge part of our program is to help tenants, to help our participants understand what it means to be to be a citizen in their community, and to fulfill the things that they have agreed to do. So we would do the best that we could in order to, and if it came down to the landlord wanting to not lease up that person any longer, then we would try and work with you, but you wouldn't ultimately get problems from us, correct?
Correct.
On that. If it was something that was just unresolvable to your satisfaction, then we could go in whatever direction you wanted to go in terms of.
Well, you're here advocating for housing, and I support that. But it becomes a lot, and everyone in this room is going to agree whether they say it or not. The brain damage that goes with it is worth how much?
I do. I understand that. Which part of my response to that is that if I'm working with you and you say to me, you know, this is what I'm looking for and this is what I don't want in a tenant, to the best of my ability, and I truly mean that, I would follow through with that, with your request, and not send you someone that wasn't going to take care of your property, or someone, again, that had perhaps a known violent criminal history or something of that nature. But again, it's not an exact science, but I truly do my best with my landlords, because I have a relationship with our participants, but that's not my primary job. My primary job is to establish relationship with landlords and to work with landlords and build a relationship with you.
I mean, I can quickly address some of this concern. If the folks who work at the shelter on housing programs are doing their job, you have their phone number and you can call them when there's a problem. We want to be in the middle. We want to know as soon as we possibly can. We want to get involved before it's an issue. And there's one requirement in being in a housing program, at the shelter anywhere. You have to honor your lease. And if you're violating your lease, it affects their stability. It might return them to homelessness. Our job is to prevent that from happening. And I can't do that effectively in any systematic way unless I know the landlord and they trust me and I understand what the lease requirements are, and I can hopefully be the communicator to a resolution to the person smoking outside. This just happened to someone in one of our units over at Boulder. Got a complaint from a neighbor at one of the units we own, so we are landlords too, by the way. He was smoking on the porch. It was coming in through his air conditioning unit. You know, is there something we can do? He's very nice. The case manager went right over. We have a great tenant. He agreed. I had no idea. I'm going to go and I'll smoke 25 feet away from the front door, whatever the ordinance is. Problem solved. 9 times out of 10, it might take a little more work than that. But if we're doing our job, we're purposefully in the middle to try and have a long-term relationship.
This gentleman had his hand up for a while.
A lot of landlords are more mediators in the courts of eviction courts.
Would you like the?
I don't know.
Can you speak a little louder?
Sorry.
That's fine.
And more I'm seeing cases that aren't the drug users, or they're not the chronic, mental illness or those kind of things. They're trying to exist in an economy that is low pay scale and high rent. Right? And I'm not only seeing it in courts, I'm also seeing it personally in, friends I've got that are small business owners that are starting to move into campers because they say they just can't afford to pay $1,600, $1,700 a month rent. Are you seeing a change in the dynamic that people you're dealing with in that population, which is not the population we're concerned about? When we're talking about if I rent to them, they're gonna, use meth in my house, or they're gonna destroy the property. With some section of people that are hardworking people that just can't make enough in Boulder County to survive.
And that is such a valid question and comment, and that is another conversation that I have with quite a few landlords. Will this person be able to truly become self-sufficient and be able to sustain this amount of rent in Boulder County? And in some ways, we still, the jury's still out on that, because some of our programs are new enough that we don't know. We've had some successes and some people graduate from our program. Most people are still involved in our program. But one of the things that we do talk about with our case managers and with our group as a whole is helping people. Now, this may not be exactly what landlords want to hear, but we do start having the conversation with them. If by the end of a year, or as we're progressing forward with you, and we assess every 4 months, where are you at in your finances? How far along are you on this road to self-sufficiency? Is it going to be ultimately sustainable? And for a lot of folks, it's not. A lot of it depends on their situation, granted, but for people who I work with a couple right now that they both work at Taco Bell, and they're not likely, it's an honorable job. They're just not likely to be able to sustain living in Boulder County in another 2 years. So part of what we do is help people plan for that. What are your other options? Do you have family that live in some other part of the country? Can you get a second job? Can you apply for Project Self-Sufficiency? Can you go back to school? So we start having that conversation with them early enough, because we fully realize that the cost of living here is so high. A lot of us, caseworkers, we don't live in Boulder County because we can't afford to. And so that's why we have that conversation quite often. Did you want to say something?
Well, I just wanted to say that we're encouraging roommate situations and things like that from the get-go. And yes, the high cost of living is challenging, but also remember this rapid rehousing. Michael was talking about the other voucher programs, permanent supportive housing. There are other programs out there. So at least in our program, we are constantly assessing to see if they're able to, right from the get-go, are they able to be sustainable wherever they lease up? And would a roommate situation work best for them to become sustainable? And if maybe they do work at McDonald's, and that's what they're doing, then maybe they can try to get a housing choice voucher or a permanent supportive voucher, and we have supports in trying to help the tenants find that more permanent solution.
I have a quick question about the housing vouchers, because you mentioned that there was an increased resource coming available. How does one access that? I think in the past there have been lotteries. They get divided up between different organizations that work with the homeless, etc. But is there any way, other than being at very high risk, that one can access those at this point?
Yeah, the access to rental subsidies has been very sort of hit or miss. There are 4 different agencies that are considered housing authorities in the county. They all manage their lists in different ways. They all have different standards and different rules. They have different applications generally. There's some, and so one of the things that I vocalize quite strongly is that these systems are so complicated that people with the highest needs can't even access them. If you don't have a mailing address or a phone, how are you going to get a housing choice voucher? How are you going to know when the orientation is? How are you going to? You've got all sorts of life-threatening competition in your life, and so just carving out the time to, what ends up happening is you end up skimming from the top, right? And so only the most functional folks of the needy group end up really accessing these resources. So what we've done a lot of work so far, and we'll have to continue, is trying to arrange a system so these resources are specifically, some of these resources for the needy are specifically designated for the homeless, and trying to make sure access is equitable for the homeless. And it's like the picture of the fence, right? It's the same height fence for everybody, but the tall person gets to look over and the short person is staring at wood. So how do we make it equitable for the homeless in terms of access to these mainstream resources? So we have a collective system that's developing right now. We do a case conferencing that's being resourced by various funding. We're going to try and bring more resources into that, and then we will try and distribute that more equitably to a specific homeless population so that access is really totally increased, as opposed to depending on this myriad web of access points.
Good. And it's the national conversation is much more finding that equitable and serving the most vulnerable, because the access is systems are coming. I mean, it's a process, right? It's a process.
A lot of progress has been made in this sort of coordination of trying to, understand what the demand is, where we can get funding for the demand, and then we get the resources, how do we distribute those in an equitable and quick way?
Well, that's helpful.
In the back, someone? Yes.
So, to reflect what she was stating about like the lottery system and all of that. So say this individual goes out and puts his name or her name out on these lists, and we go out and they get pulled out of one of the lottery lists that they applied for. They're connected with you because they're staying either at the homeless shelter, or they're working with DIP, or working with various programs. So we decide they're gonna come and get one of my apartments, okay? And it's under our voucher because their names come up. Do they still get the case management that you guys provide, or is the case management tied with your voucher program?
Right, so if we're doing our job right, and I'd like to think that I'd like to think we always did it right, but we're doing it better now, is this notion is that we're following people out the door, right? So we have our own program that I talked about that we're really tightly in control of, but we're also expanding this into the notion of how do we interact with people who have a housing resource in the shelter, and then take the necessary steps to make sure they get the voucher, find an apartment, and move in. So we just had a gentleman who's long-term homeless, disabled, he's 62 years old, had a lot of trouble placing his voucher that he presented to us. We helped him present it. He just moved in, and we have arranged with the landlord to have at least a couple of months of, some sort of regular contact with the tenant to make sure rent's coming up, are we doing okay, how's the electric, how's the utility bills going, how are your food needs, other really basic issues. The landlord understands we're involved in this way, the tenant has agreed and understands why we're following to the next level, and if that person all of a sudden destabilizes and needs more support, we're going to have to adjust internally. But the plan is, and everything that we know about him from his stay at the shelter, is that we do not anticipate he will need that kind of support, that after a few months we'll back off, the landlord will still have our contact, he'll have our contact, maybe it's every 2 months, and then maybe it's every 4 months, so that we can just sort of ease off, sort of nice soft landing, be supportive to the landlord, be supportive to the tenant, and hopefully we're on our way.
Okay, so it doesn't.
Yeah, and our program does the same. Our case managers follow for a couple months after they are off the program, and then they check in at 6 months and a year. So it is a systematic, purposeful continuation of case management, at least with our program too.
You will still receive the case management even if they get
that the plan is to give them case management support that they need, that's sort of equitable to the barriers they face, so that they can be permanently housed instead. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I work for one of those four,
Housing authorities.
Housing authorities here in the county, and nobody has brought up one of the challenges that we face as well as landlords, and I'm by no means putting this on the landlords, because we love all our landlords that participate with us in the program. We have payment standards that we have to stay within, and it's just a simple fact that the market is bearing, in many cases, rents higher than the payment standards. So that's a challenge that we are all facing, landlords as well as us. And I would like to just let all of them know that we are accessible, because sometimes there's a stigma attached that says, well, they never answer the phone, or they never get back to me. We're accessible, we're willing to work with them, we're willing to tell them what those standards are and what they can charge, and hopefully, that they're willing to, accept some of that. Because again, like I said, the market right now is crazy, like we all know. And it's not landlord's fault, it's just what the market is bearing.
And we have a program in Boulder County where we let our applicants, our participants know at the outset, when we first meet with them, the range that we want them to be looking in, and the range that we will be looking at as well on their behalf. And oftentimes we don't tell them, well, you can find someplace that's $2,500 a month, because that is ordinarily what they will do. So we want them to stay within, something that's more reasonable. But I have a program, a computer program that I work with, and one of our programs, COC Continuum of Care, we are allowed to pay whatever is rent reasonable for one of our participants. And so I put all of the figures in this particular program, and it does comparables in that area and comes back to tell me whether or not that particular property is rent reasonable. And if it is rent reasonable, then we can go with that for that participant.
Well,
We just ask them though not to go to the max, unless they can find absolutely nothing else.
and that's one of the housing programs, but what this gentleman from another housing authority was talking, the fair market rent rate is often our limit. So these are standards that are federally from HUD. The fair market rate is a rate that our programs have to pay under to, so that's what he was addressing. And I know that one of the programs is rent reasonable, but a lot of them are their fair market rate. So, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I've got a question. So I'm a landlord. Why should I be involved with any of these programs? I mean, especially given the market right now, is there any benefit to me for working with somebody, like with a Section 8 or something like that you might come up with? And I'm just trying to.
Well, I think the big thing is the support that you would get behind the tenant, right? Mm-hmm. You have all of us, and you have the program and the case managers, and I know I have only one property, but I know that I've been burned a lot lately. I've been a property manager for these people are there forever, and they're just great. But it's kind of risk. Of course it's risk. I've been burned.
Yeah.
And but at least with this program you have people advocating for both you and the tenant and for the relationship to work, right?
Right. Yeah, we've gone to mediation in
right.
certain situations.
I think that, did you have an answer from a
Yeah,
PHA point of
one
view?
of the things that I would tell landlords, new landlords particularly, that have questions like that, like this gentleman here, is I think all of you have at one point or another not gotten paid from tenants and not gotten paid maybe for a couple of months or a significant amount of time before you had to take action and try to remove them. One of the great benefits of this program is you are always going to get the majority of that rent from us every month, or from you know, the program. And generally, most of our tenants, if not all of our tenants, are paying their portion, because if they do not, they will lose their assistance. So if they're violating their leases, so you're getting the HUD money from us guaranteed every month, plus most of our tenants, the vast majority of them are paying their portion because they don't want to lose their assistance.
And so I'd like to, before going into another question, I think I'd like to talk to this just a little bit, because other changes are being made in the system too. You're talking about, it's a business relationship, and you're talking about the risks being too great to versus the upside. The upside, of course, is guaranteed rent, right?
And flexibility of the rent level that you can put, you know.
Right.
I have a couple houses in the city of Boulder, and, you know, the rent, the taxes are like ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, right. So, I mean, you have to act that in the purpose that you've created this business for yourself. I mean, there's no question about that. And we are very sensitive to the notion that, and I don't know if I've ever seen really good data about the risks of renting to homeless folks in general, or rental assistance folks in general versus a student. I mean, I've never seen the data. But we are sensitive to that this is just a barrier, whether it is a perceived barrier or whether it's an actual barrier. And so PHAs are taking action, and the cities and the county are talking about taking action. One of those actions will be a mitigation fund.
PHA?
Public Housing Authority. So thanks, acronyms are a dangerous thing. There's talk about a mitigation fund, a countywide mitigation fund, that a landlord, if they run into a big problem, there's damage to the unit, or there's some extra expense that's not covered by the deposit, that you can apply for a mitigation of that expense, so that the risk that you may perceive in terms of renting to a certain population group, you know, we can balance that out. Boulder Housing Partners is organizing different responses. They are sending thank you checks to new landlords who decide to work with vouchers holders. For new lease-up folks, there's a proposal on the table to have deposit assistance for folks, so that we can quickly get people in housing, so you don't have to wait for someone to find their deposit assistance. There is a proposal on the table that rent starts when the apartment's available. So if you're working with the paperwork and you put it on the paperwork that we're ready for inspection on the 15th, the rent starts on the 15th. Not when the housing authority can schedule an inspection a week later, and then we schedule the lease a week later, so that you're not having a 2-week buffer and then losing income from that. There's all sorts of conversations going on to try and address the notion of making it a more favorable relationship in terms of doing business with us, as opposed to open market. I will say this: we've placed in the marketplace about 75 different people. Okay, we've had one eviction. Okay. That doesn't mean we haven't had a rescission, but we've had one eviction. And I do not remember any time in any of the history of our 10-year program we left a landlord high and dry in terms of money, uncompensated money. Another thing that is being proposed at Boulder Housing Partners specifically, and again, these are countywide conversations, but they're stepping forward first, is they are wondering whether they should allow Section 8 voucher holders to be able to transfer their voucher from one landlord to another if they have outstanding bills at the existing landlord, right? And so that they would have to have a letter of recommendation from the existing landlord to accommodate a move, right? So that they're not running away from a problem, for instance. Now, there has to be some balance in here, because our clients, not everybody follows the lease, and I know, believe it or not, some landlords also, are not following their rules either. And so that has to be balanced, right? But the point is I want to give you the impression that we're sensitive to these risks, and the system is talking a lot about them. And I think over the course of the next 6 months, you'll see some acute, things put in place to try and mitigate that. Yes,
I wanted to follow up. So I'm also from the Housing Authority, and I'm also a landlord. So on my side, I'm the regional property manager. But my history and where I currently stand, I'm a native of Loveland. So I'm actually on the Affordable Housing Board for the City of Loveland. And we do the coordinated entry there. I wanted to also to remind the landlords that yes, your payment will be part, you know, for most of your payment, you have your backup resources for your deposits and everything that you just stated. But second of all, when they have that coordinated entry with permanent supportive housing, they have a case manager that goes in that will look over the housekeeping upgrades, you know, and so there's a strong communication line. I haven't ever experienced in 10 plus years that I've been in this, 15 plus actually, that I have not experienced any communication barrier that when permanent supportive housing came into northern Colorado. So it's also great to have that because that's one of the biggest communication is the landlord happens to stop by because there's a work order placed and then they see the, you know, 6-7 months the tenant's been in there. We've seen some work orders that neither have been neglecting or the grounds or whatnot. So when having case manager going in and by the month and also too, you know, having a case manager but also being a landlord that has resources connected with the local police department, working out with those outside agencies, because the more communication you have, the better outcome you have within your properties. So there's, I mean, there's a lot of great stuff that you can be doing with it. So it's not just the money part, but it's also the work that they do. They do the majority of our work that we need as landlords.
Yes, sir.
It seems like to me that when we're talking about hard luck, that's kind of one concept. But, you know, hard luck for some people starts when they're in the study hall in high school goofing off. And they have hard luck all their life for some reason. So it's not just one incident of an accident. Hard luck is sometimes what we work to make. And then another thing is we're talking about bridges here. It seems like to me the person furnishing the bridges here are the taxpayers. Without the taxpayers, all the rest of us are, you know, we're more or less parasites when you consider that the taxpayers are doing all of this. And we can be enablers as much as we want to be enablers, but the couple working at Taco and can't make the bills, you know, Taco and all the other places are replacing workers with menus. You go into McDonald's now in the North End and they've redone so you just go in there and punch it in, and everybody that goes to King Soopers or Safeway, they can go through their own checkout, and so that means there are less people doing. This program is going to fail because automation is producing more homelessness than you people are servicing. But anyway, that's life.
Yeah, I mean, you know, one of the things you have to deal with when you're working in a homeless shelter is to understand you're not going to save everybody. And you know, there's a lot to unravel in what you said.
Why would you want to save everybody? I mean, that's ridiculous.
Why would I? Well, I mean,
yeah,
again, there's a lot to unravel. I mean, I think I could, if I would like in a perfect world to be able to save everybody, you know, I think that, you know, that's not an unreasonable thing to believe. Just if you don't think it's possible just because of the pragmatism of it. I'm a pretty pragmatic guy, so I understand. What I'm trying to say is I understand sort of what you're saying. When we come to the work at a homeless shelter, we're not under the illusion that we can fix every problem that we see. We're not under the illusion that it's only the system's fault. We're not under the illusion, you know, there's a confluence of events that are going on here that provide a person who's standing in front of me to be unbelievably needy. But, you know, ultimately, if we're talking about it from a very pragmatic point of view, which I think is part of what you're saying, I can save the taxpayer money by taking a chronically homeless person off the street rather than letting him languish on the streets. It's just, the data's just there to show it. And so we don't even have to talk about the goal of trying to provide a minimum something for everyone. We don't have to talk about a goal of compassion or what even those words even mean. We can just simply say, let's save some money, and so that the varied cost of homelessness in the fire department, so the varied cost of the homelessness at the police department, so the varied cost of homelessness in the ER, so the varied cost of homelessness in the jail. These are all things we're paying for anyway. So why don't we pay for it in a way that gets the best outcomes for that person? And so that's the approach. And in terms of addressing people who have a lower need set or are not quite as unfortunate as the folks that we've been regularly dealing with. Let's prevent them from being in a system that makes them sicker and makes their mental health issues worse and makes their substance abuse worse, like getting them help when they need it. So again, the burden on the taxpayer is minimized. That's really, I mean, it's a very pragmatic sort of goal.
Figures, do you take into consideration the retirement pay for the policemen and the firemen? No, you're not doing that. So when you're figuring the cost factor, I think you're leaving out of people.
That it's not costing as much, or?
You're not putting in all the factors when you're saying one thing is cheaper than another thing. If you figure the taxpayers, what they have to pay out for retirement, for the policemen, the firemen, and your jobs and everybody else's, into whether or not the homelessness, you're saving money one place or the other, that's a different story.
Yes?
What's the process in your program for vetting the clients, and what are the requirements that they have to meet?
Sandy can answer that question.
Yeah, so
That's what they do. It's something called panel.
yeah, so we have a few different programs, and some are specifically for the homeless, and that is a national coordinated entry program serving the most vulnerable. But we have another program that is funded by Boulder County, and they have to be referred by a case manager that is working with them through a community partner. I see one of our community partner people from EFA back there, Courtney. So like, for instance, someone from Courtney's, from EFA, Emergency Family Assistance Association, or our center, or one of the DV shelters, will be doing a referral, and it comes to a bi-weekly panel of housing experts that are from Boulder County, from the community partners, and we all with a consensus decide if that applicant is a good candidate for our program. So they are vetted, they do get background checks, they do go through, I mean, our panel, sometimes Courtney's there, 20, 25 people, looking at this family. The family or the household, it's not always a family, sorry, the household would submit an application, but the referring case manager would also submit an application. So there is a process, and we only approve those that we think can be successful in the short amount of rental assistance that we provide. Now, other programs obviously have different requirements. We also, in that local funded program, do have, they have to be clean from meth for a year. They have to be clean from heroin for 6 months. And we run backgrounds, no violent offenders, things like that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, and as far as, like, I see minimal required forms, RFTA, W-9 signed lease, like, I guess the kind of barriers that, do you see that as being, something that will block somebody from entering this program, or what, how does that?
So those minimum, wait, you said the?
Yeah, it says RFTA form.
Yeah, the RAFTA.
So those are landlord documents.
Okay.
So those, the RAFTA is just a request for tenancy approval. It's just basic information about the unit. Some of our federally funded programs need an inspection, but these local funds that I'm talking about, we don't do housing inspections, but we request this landlord document, and then the W-9 is there for Boulder County needs the W-9 with any payments we make.
So the paperwork for our program is fairly minimal compared to perhaps some other programs that I don't work with. And if and when I find a landlord that works with us, then I send them those 3 documents: the direct deposit, if in fact they want direct deposit, a W-9, and the RAFTA, to fill out and send back to me, then I pass that on to Sandy, and then we process payments once a week for folks, and we don't pay application fees unless, this is a little bit off topic, but I'll tell you anyway. We don't pay application fees unless a landlord takes a credit card, and I can use my county credit card for that. But we do pay deposits, and there are situations that we can pay double deposit if it's a higher risk situation, and then we pay the rent every month, but into direct deposit, or a check can be mailed. But the basic documents are to be able to facilitate that payment. There aren't any other documents that we need lots of information from landlords about. Well,
Do landlords, are they allowed to raise the rent if need be?
Question?